Okay, so to get us started, one of the things that we just wanted to start with was when we have been working on our strategic planning here in human resources. One of our mission statements that we came up with was that we want to strive to make a difference in the lives of public servants by creating environments where people thrive. We just came to the we want to put the resource back in human resources. Um, we want to take care of our people in our community. And if we take care of our people in our community, then they're just going to be all around better employees. So we hope to help people develop that. So what we're going to do for today is just go over, have a general overview of FMLA and ADA because we know it can be complicated. There are times when we get questions, Beth and I, that we still have to look up because it's so nuanced and everything is pretty gray, which I know is not super helpful and people don't love all the time, but that's what we're here for. And we work a lot with the law department to help us make some of those decisions too, when we're unsure about different cases, because every situation is unique, because individuals are unique. We are also going to talk about some of the FMLA and ADA developments that are being proposed in some of our law and legal situations and some that have just passed. We'll give some examples of some situations that maybe we can talk through, and then we are going to touch a little bit on paid parental leave toward the end. If anyone has any questions at any time, please feel free to pop in the chat or come off mute. And you're more than welcome to ask those questions, but I am going to put you on mute. And that way, you'll be paying attention, hopefully, to the presentation while we have this going on. But if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt this training Q&A session. How you would like it to run is for you. So just a brief overview of some of the areas we're going to touch on today. The Americans with Disabilities Act is something that protects the employee's right to work by requiring reasonable accommodations to qualified individuals to meet their disabilities. And we will talk a little bit about what reasonable means, what a qualified individual means, what a disability means, all of those a little bit later down the road in today's presentation. FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act, protects an employee's right not to work by providing job protected leave to eligible employees under certain situations and circumstances. And again, we will go through some of those situations and circumstances. So you'll see there's a little bit of overlap there and in the Venn diagram of things, how those kind of all work together and interplay together. The state workers' compensation laws provide benefits to employees who are injured on the job, while our department does not take care of the county side for workers' compensation. We do work with the employees on the county side who are in the middle of filing a claim or on workers' compensation because they may, again, overlap with some of those FMLA and ADA benefits that are afforded to them that will help during that time. There is also a new act that has been passed called the Nebraska Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And that requires that employers be provided to provide accommodations to employees who are pregnant or have given birth, which includes nursing mothers or that have a related medical condition. So those are some of the things that we're going to go over a little bit today, and that's a very, very brief overview before we dive into those a little bit more in depth. So this is my own little philosophy on how I like to explain FMLA because I like to relate everything I can to food. I think food makes it easy for people to kind of relate to it or see the pattern of some of the things. So when I'm explaining FMLA, I like to explain FMLA as an ice cream sundae. And our banks of leave are the ice cream flavors. So it doesn't matter what ice cream flavor you're putting on that ice cream sundae, you're always going to have the FMLA sprinkles on the top so that we're eating them in conjunction together. They go together to make that sundae. Now we do have that caveat where you have to eat all of your other ice cream flavors, all of your other banks of leave before you go into that leave without pay status. But for the most part, that's how I like to explain um, FMLA and how that works and how they go together. Beth, anything else to add in there for my Sundays? So we do have a couple of different statutes, as you can see, the ADA and FMLA. The Americans with Disabilities Act. So that is for employers who have at least 15 employees, which county does, so they would qualify for that. There's no eligibility period, meaning that an employee doesn't have to work here a certain amount of time or be off of probation or any of those types of provisions that we sometimes have for other situations or employees. They are eligible to utilize or apply for the accommodation under the ADA at any time. There's no specific limit on the amount of leave for an ADA accommodation request. We just have to define what's reasonable. And like I said, that is really contingent upon every different situation that comes up. Some are going to have leave that they want and others are not. So it really just depends on every situation that we weigh in with every department and every division. And we work on that collaboratively. That's a collaborative effort. The Family Medical Leave Act, we have to have at least 50 employees, again, which the county has. This does have a provision for our employees. So employees, in order to be eligible to utilize FMLA, they have to have worked here for at least a year, so 12 months. And they have to have worked at least 1,250 hours in that last month. So, for example, if I broke my leg today, March 6, 2024, what we would do is called a look back. And we would look back at March 6, 2023 to today and make sure that I've worked that 1,250 hours in that last year behind to make sure that I'm eligible to utilize FMLA. That provides you 12 work weeks and maybe I shouldn't say leave, but protected um, leave that you can use in conjunction with your other banks of leave because it's a non-paid leave. It's those sprinkles on the top within a 12-month period. Now, if there are regular employees where they are working regular overtime, um, then we do have some different calculations. They could be eligible for a little bit more FMLA time because that is worked in there as well. We've also got some of our first responders who don't work typical 40-hour work weeks. They work our 52, 56, whatever that might be. So we make our calculations for their FMLA leave based on that, and they are eligible for a little bit more leave as far as that FMLA goes, the protected leave, because they do work more hours. Any questions on that? So when folks take leave under either the ADA or FMLA, the employee who takes leave as a reasonable accommodation under the ADA provisions say that they can return to the same position. Once they're coming back to work, they're authorized to return to work, unless holding that position open would impose an undue. We will discuss what undue hardship means and looks like um, a little bit later down in the PowerPoint. And the FMLA job protection rights for 12 weeks, so the employee must be restored to the same or an equivalent position once they return to work. So there's very, very slight differences in the two of those when we're talking about having someone return to a position after being out. It really just depends on the reasons they were out, and under what acts they were out, how we were accommodating them, things of that nature. Processes for each are, again, there's some overlap, slight differences here and there. But under the Americans Disability Act, one of the things about the Americans with Disability Act, all of our requests for that, they don't necessarily need to go through a written or formal request process. The way the law is laid out states that an employee, an employer, a supervisor, even a family member, someone who's in the know could contact risk and say, "Hey, we've got some concerns about an employee, or I think someone might be struggling and they might benefit from some accommodations." Once we are aware of that information, we then work with the employee and their supervisor and their department to walk through that entire interactive process. And that really truly is an interactive process with everyone involved. We sit down with the employee. We do have to have medical documentation to back support what it is they're requesting. If at any point in time the employee, even if the employee did not make the request, says that they would not like to continue in that process, or they are not comfortable with moving forward, or they are not able to provide us with the medical documentation that supports an accommodation request, that process is ending. It ends at that point in time. They're more than welcome to start that application, that uh, request back up at any time if they would like to. Um, Once managers are aware and the city knows, as soon as they let us know, we'll start that process. So we reach out to the employee, we work with their medical providers to get that medical certification, the forms that we have here in the Human Resources Department. All of that is kept confidential. Of course, working with the employee and their supervisor and their team. You do have an obligation to report it, even if the employees don't want you to. That is where Beth and I can kind of come in and hopefully work as that liaison and that person, that intermittent, uh, to bridge that gap and hopefully get some accommodations in place, or really just have a conversation with the employee and make them feel more comfortable about what's working for them and maybe what isn't, and maybe there are some things we can help with, and maybe there are some things that it doesn't make sense for. So um, we will work with them on that. And for FMLA, there is a process where we need our folks to fill out an application. Same with that. Supervisors, managers, once you are aware of an employee who you believe might be eligible for an FMLA medical event, please just let us know. Um, the sooner we're aware, the sooner we can help work through that process with them. Again, medical documentation, we will work with their provider to get that going for them, to make sure that it is a FMLA medical qualifying event. We are required as an employer, once we receive that medical documentation, to give our employees their rights and responsibilities under that act. And I should note also, once we are made aware of a situation that would qualify for FMLA, we are required under that act, under that federal law, to designate any of their time, as long as they're eligible, as an FMLA event. So we have to designate that as protected leave. I know one of the things we sometimes hear, Beth and I, from employees is that they don't wish to designate their time as FMLA, or don't want to use that. Unfortunately, the law says once we're aware, we have to afford you that benefit and that right and that protected leave as an employee. So we're going to do that and we're going to follow that law. So that's when we have that ice cream sundae come in and they use that in conjunction with their leave if they have that, or leave without pay if they need to go that route. Their medical certification, they do have 15 days to get that back to us. So we work with them again to get that back, work through the situation. I know that sometimes our supervisors and managers say, "Oh my goodness, this is taking such a long time." It does, but also because one, we're doing our checks and due process to make sure that they are eligible and qualified to utilize FMLA, but also the employee has provisions under that law that they have time to get us back the medical information that we need in order to get their time designated a certain way. Once we have that, we will let the employee and the supervisor know that they have been approved for FMLA so that you and the employee can help designate their time in your timekeeping system as that FMLA qualifying event. Beth, am I leaving anything out?
I can't think of anything. I will add in that when you do code people's time, it is helpful to make sure that they get a full 40-hour week in. So if they don't have enough paid leave time, you would enter leave without pay to make sure that all 40 of those hours are accounted for.
And Beth and I also understand that everyone may use a different timekeeping system or have a little bit different way that things get entered into Oracle. So if you ever have any problems or questions or anything with that, please just let us know and we'll be glad to help. So under the ADA, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, medical inquiries are permitted only if the job related um, only if it's related to the job and consistent with their essential functions of their job. So we can only ask for medical information when it pertains to one, their disability and the way the disability affects the nature of them of the employee to perform the essential functions of their job. We can't just go asking about someone's entire medical history or something that completely doesn't relate to anything that they're doing or that they're claiming we're asking for accommodation for. So a lot of times, Beth and I will work with employees to help walk them through that process and help them understand and calm some fears that we're not going to go back and ask for their entire medical history from the day they were born. We only want that snapshot of that medical piece of what is preventing them or creating barriers for them to complete the essential functions of their job. Under FMLA, when FMLA leave is requested, the employees may be required to submit a medical certification from their healthcare provider. We do have medical certification forms that we require our employees to submit, and we give those to our employees once we receive their initial application. So we work with them and their medical provider if needed to get us that medical information. Now, again, we talk about some of the overlap in the Venn diagram of ADA and FMLA and all those fun interplays. But employees' absences, their illnesses due to injuries, physical limitations, disabilities, requests for accommodations, and leave, they can involve the ADA, they can involve FMLA, they can involve a work comp claim, um, they can involve pregnancy. They can involve two of those. They can involve all of those. Sometimes there's overlap in all of those areas. So it kind of just depends on what comes in. Sometimes we'll get one piece and we'll say, oh, wait, have we thought about, is this qualify under the ADA? Is this actually a leave that might qualify under FMLA? Is this person eligible for this? So sometimes we've got a lot of different things going on at one time, while all are sort of different silos, they all tend to overlap, but they all have their own processes. And I know that that can be overwhelming. And it seems like we're asking for a lot of different paperwork for a lot of different things when it really just is one case. But we have to kind of treat them all because they all have their different special caveats and nuances and things of that nature. Um, let's see, the ADA, FMLA, and workers' comp, they can overlap where the employee suffers a workplace injury. We see this happen quite frequently that results in a serious health condition. Usually, when someone is off for a workers' compensation claim for more than 3 days, 3 to 4 days, as long as they're eligible for FMLA, and again, being eligible means that they have worked here for at least 1 year and they've worked at least 1,250 hours in the prior year from their date of injury. Uh, then we would go ahead and work with them on completing that FMLA paperwork. Um, so anytime we see something come up due to a request for an accommodation or a workers' compensation claim, we go ahead and check all of these other areas to make sure that we are not missing a benefit for one of our employees that we could be affording to them and that we need to be giving to them and letting them know that they have. If you ever have any questions about whether or not yourself or an employee, or maybe um, someone has questions about getting ready to go out on leave and you're just not sure, please direct them to us. We're more than happy to answer any questions about how those work and what might be at play. So this is one of our fun Venn diagrams about where you can see some of those are overlapping. Again, for our workers' compensation, there could be a workplace injury that qualifies under FMLA. Maybe they're going to come back in a light duty capacity for a couple of weeks. That's considered an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we would be accommodating their current medical needs under their workers' compensation claim, things of that nature. So again, two, three, four things could be going on at one time. Maybe it's only one thing, but we're here to help work that out for you. So sometimes we have some different scenarios that we just like to work through and have people give some thought to. One of them would be potentially you have a job candidate and the job candidate requests an adjustment to an application or the interview process due to a medical condition. Um, is this something we would do? We would. It is, we would provide an accommodation. That was something that we need to do under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I know that y'all work with Laura's team very frequently when you're working on hiring and things of that nature. If you ever have anyone that you're working with on an interview that's coming in or says they need some assistive technology, maybe to fill out an application or would need something during an interview or application process, please do not hesitate to reach out and let us know because that is something we would help accommodate. An employee might mention to you that they are having a hard time performing a task or job duty. So, in this situation, we might handle that a little bit differently because it could potentially turn out to be something that we might be able to accommodate. It could be related to a disability or something that's creating a barrier for them when it comes to performing the essential functions of their job. But we probably need to look into that a little further before we start making accommodations right away and just going through with that. While we are, as Nebraskans and Midwesterners, very keen on making people feel comfortable, and we're very empathetic, and we want to help everyone and give them all the tools necessary to do their proper job. There are some times where if we kind of jump that process, that we might be doing ourselves a little bit of detriment and harm as opposed to being actually helpful later on down the road. So we would ask that if you have any of these situations come up, that you would reach out to Risk and let us help you walk through that process and gather that information properly before we start making adjustments right away to someone's jobs and their essential functions. Let's say an employee requests an adjustment to their job duties due to a medical condition. Um, Again, if the request is simple, it might not be an accommodation. Um, if they are provided an accommodation, uh, we may need to work through that a little bit further with our interactive ADA process. That's what Beth and I are here for in our entire risk department. um, Example, an employee might have a difficult time getting to work at 8 during the winter weather months. If you allow that employee to have a modified schedule, you might have to allow other employees to have a similar modified schedule. So, one of the things Beth and I like to remind our folks of is consistency and equity. When we're thinking about some of the things that we're granting or accommodating our employees with, we just want to make sure that we're remaining consistent and equitable. And we want to think about if someone else were to have the same request, would we be able to grant it for them? If so, why or why not? And are they in similar positions? Because we want to keep all of those things consistent and equitable across the board. If ever you have any questions, again, about any of that, Beth and I would definitely be here to help you work through those scenarios and situations. Because we do recognize that, like we said, we're all different. We all have different scenarios and different things that pop up. So we want to be cognizant of the uniqueness of all individuals and their situations. But we also have to treat people consistently and equitably. So, right, there's a little bit of overlap or contradiction there that sometimes can make it difficult. So, in our ADA interactive processes, we want to document our conversations and our questions. If there is no medical documentation, it might not be an accommodation under the ADA. It might just be an accommodation. And that's one of those situations or scenarios where we would need to be careful in those situations because we want to make sure that if someone else came to us, again, had the same request, also did not have medical documentation, that we will be able to provide that accommodation or request to all of our employees similarly across the board. Um, you want to document, or we document, and Beth and I would be a part of the interactive processes with your employee and your department. But let's say, for an example, an employee just comes in to talk to you off the cusp. Before Beth and I became aware, you asked us to be involved or help. It's always good to document what they asked for, even if they asked for nothing for their accommodation. Um, and again, Beth and I are always of the mindset, if you can provide something that someone is requesting and it's easy, please do that. And by that, I mean, for example, Beth requests, yes, an ergonomic mouse because she's like, my wrist is hurting me. Get that girl a mouse. Like those are cheap, those are inexpensive. You can just provide the people the tools to do that job. Yeah, the mouse pad she's got, an ergonomic keyboard. The other ones we get frequently are the standing desk situations. If you would like to provide your employee with a standing desk and they're requesting one, please do that. Go ahead and do that. You don't need permission from us to do that. And we don't need to come out and evaluate your workstation in that way. If an employee says, "Hey, I think it would be better for me to have, the height or the mobility or to change this up and down," they know their body is when I don't need a medical note that says they need a standing desk. We can provide them with that. That's pretty simple. Now, some of the other things that may not be as simple to provide are tools that are a little bit maybe more pricier outside the norm. Sometimes some of our assistive softwares or technologies might have a little bit bigger price tag on it, and that might be something that we might want to consider an accommodation and go through a little bit more of a process. But if somebody's just requesting that ergonomic mouse, you get them that mouse. Okay, I empower you to do that. You can go ahead and still document that you did it too. So again, some of our scenarios, if an employee is performing poorly, it indicates the performance issues are due to a medical condition. This is something I don't want to say it's more common for some of our employees. Beth, do you want to weigh in on this? Because I think you've kind of had some recent situations with this one where an employee maybe has had some performance concerns. And once we come to speak with them regarding some of those performance concerns, that's when we tend to learn about or hear about that they may feel that some of that may be related to a medical condition. And at that point, here's where we might step in.
Ye Yes, we recently had an employee with attendance issues, and they were working on progressive discipline. And before we got into progressive discipline, we talked about, let's make sure there's not a medical issue where we don't need to be doing some accommodations. Um, in that case, we just want to make sure. That one is actually going to be ADA and FMLA, because anytime they miss while they are absent due to the medical condition would also be covered by FMLA. So there's one good example of that one.
Yeah. So those are some of the ones that we like to take a little bit deeper dive into before we start a, before we start down a certain path. We want to make sure that we have afforded all of our employees their the rights and benefits they have under that, and make sure that we're treating each situation appropriately under that. Sometimes there are medical conditions that are affecting performance, and sometimes there's not. But that's something that HR can definitely help you navigate through that situation and help you decide whether or not that's kind of a performance-based concern, a disability, maybe an accommodation situation, or maybe it's neither, maybe it's both. But we'll help you navigate through those and how we address both of those situations and processes.
Absolutely. I would also just add real quick that in this case, the department actually waited a little longer. Like, I wish they would have contacted us sooner, because now the individual is almost out of leave, instead of us being able to kind of help navigate that a little bit earlier in the process. And then I forgot my second train of thought, so I'll think of it.
Maybe it'll pop back up after some of our other
Right.
scenarios. A supervisor observes that an employee is having a difficult time performing their job duties because of an observable, geez Louise, starting to lose my voice again, medical condition. Is this a safety concern? And I would say yes. Again, that's something that we would definitely want to speak with our employee about and engage in an interactive process for a potential accommodation to see if there was something that we could do to help that employee in order to perform the essential functions of their job. Or maybe we would need to discuss um, alternative positions for them if that was something that was permanent or it was something that we just weren't going to be able to accommodate.
And I will tack on, I remembered. So one of the things with the individual that I was just talking about is we originally sent out and said, hey, is there a medical concern? And their initial response was, oh, no, I don't have anything, until they received disciplinary action. And then we went into the process. So just be aware that that can happen as well, and we'll help you through figuring that out.
Yep. In this scenario, employee states that they are having a difficult time getting to work on time because of medical treatments. This is one where it could have a couple of different overlaps or caveats going on. It could potentially be an FMLA eligible event. If the employee is eligible for FMLA and that medical event is eligible under FMLA, it could also be an accommodation through an interactive process. Maybe we are going to work with that employee to adjust some of their hours or their schedule a little bit so that they can make those medical treatments work to get to those appointments. So those are different things that we would work through and help your department or your area process with that employee as well. Here's one of Beth's favorites scenarios. An employee calls in sick 3 or more days in a row, but really the three, because we are very aware that there's this magic number of three floating around out there that as soon as that three hits, it's like a hard and fast rule that we got to have a doctor's note and it's definitely FMLA and we're counting all those days and right. And so, Beth, why is this your favorite?
If somebody is out for 3 days and can return on day 4, often our sending them to the doctor is what triggers FMLA and all the paperwork. Otherwise, they just are off for 4 days, they heal, and they come back to work, and everything is fine. um, it also has to be those 3 full days. So if somebody just goes to the doctor for 1 day, that doesn't count. Let's see, the 3 or more days in a row, I would also add that it doesn't have to be 3 days in a row to be FMLA. So a good example is someone who might have chronic migraine issues. They might be out a day this week and then 2 days in 3 weeks and every couple of weeks they seem to be out 1 or 2 days. That could be a chronic condition that would be covered under FMLA.
Yeah, and this would be a good time to note that we have FMLA can be all in one chunk of time, so they could do their 480 hours or 12 weeks all together back to back, or it could be intermittent. And that intermittent FMLA could be utilized for someone who has a serious medical condition such as migraines, where they have to, they're taken out. They just can't work for a couple days here and there a month. So there's some different areas or situations in which that FMLA gets applied. If you have any questions about that or how we handle those situations, again, you're more than welcome to contact us and we can work that through with you or your employee. But there's a couple different ways it can be intermittent or it can be all together. Again, I know, confusing. That's where we're here to help you sort through. Employee misses work on an intermittent basis. Here we go. For doctor's appointments for a chronic condition. Again, could be FMLA if they're eligible, could be an accommodation. Um,
Could be both.
could be both, could be neither. So, um, those are situations that we have worked through, and that it would truly just depend on the medical documentation that we received back, the certification from the employee, and what was going on with them. An employee requests several weeks off for their own serious medical condition. If the employee is eligible for FMLA, um, probably is going to be FMLA eligible, and we would designate it as such. And then disability, if they are granted leave under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it could be considered an accommodation. It would depend on what their leave situation was like, how much they had in their leave bank. So if we are granting them leave without pay, our leave without pay is granted first for 30 days. So that leave without pay is granted by the department director as long as that request is made by the employee or the supervisor of that employee. That 30 days starts, for example, if I requested 30 days of leave starting today, March 6th, I would have until April, 30 days to use leave without pay. Whether or not I use that entire 30 days during that period, uh, that doesn't matter. I just have that period of days to use that. In addition to that, leave without pay, an employee can request an additional 60 days on top of that. So a total overarching of 90 days leave without pay. Those next 60 days of leave without pay do have to be granted not only by the department director, but by the director of HR. So once those two sign off on, yes, we are going to grant that for you, same situation, they have that um, extra 60-day period to utilize that leave without pay time in between that. Again, I know that can be confusing. Don't expect you to know all of this. So at any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Um, an employee indicates that the child is ill, that their kiddo is ill, and that they're needed to care for the child. Um, could be FMLA eligible, depends on what the illness of the child is. Also depends on whether or not the employee is eligible to utilize that FMLA. Again, if they've worked here for a year and worked that 1,250 hours. An employee adopts a child or accepts a foster child for placement. Those situations are also eligible for FMLA. So that's, again, if the employee is eligible, they've worked here for a year, had that 1,250 hours, they become a foster parent, they are eligible to utilize FMLA for that placement and the foster and bonding for that child under FMLA.
I will make a note here that I've had a couple of requests for siblings generally are not covered under the FMLA. Adult children over 18, there has to be that child has to be disabled and unable to care for themselves for things to qualify for that. So for example, I've had a couple of my child is having a baby and I want to go be there to take care of them. There could be some medical situations where that might qualify, but most of the time that is not going to be an FMLA qualifying event. I've also had situations with a fiance. So it is spouse, child, parents. There is a parentis in locus term, and you have that here. So
Yeah, coming up, coming at you. Yeah, so when an employee becomes pregnant or expects a newborn child, um, again, as you can see, that there is a difference between a reasonable accommodation for disabilities and for pregnancy. Um, Follow up with us, or if you're not sure about any of these or how to handle them. But in addition to FMLA, as you can see on that slide there, pregnancy can also uh, activate an accommodation under ADA where pregnancy causes that your a medical condition that prevents you from being able to perform some of the essential functions of your position. So that could mean that we need to give an employee longer breaks. We need to maybe give them a light duty assignment for a brief period of time. Maybe we need to modify their work schedule. Um, so we would work through that with you and that employee in your department to make sure that we're in line with those new pregnancy accommodation laws that were just passed, and that we're providing your area and your department and that employee with the what they need to perform the essential functions of their job while they're pregnant or when they return maybe they'll have some medical restrictions due to that too. So those are things that we look at. If you have any questions about any of that, again, we're here to help with that. Beth, any follow-ups with that?
There's just some laws also around expressing breast milk and giving people time to do that. So they would get their normal breaks, for example, but they may be allowed additional breaks. And we have to offer those for them to be
Yes.
able to do that. There are certain requirements that go with that as far as having a locked door and privacy and some of those things. So that is what we're here for. So
Yes. We want to provide them with a good space, safe space, clean space to pump or do whatever they need to do when they return to work and for their breast milk. A lot of these, I mean, again, we are an employee over 50, we have 50 or more employees. So yes, we'll have to comply with FMLA laws as they are outlined by the Department of Labor. Um, when a request for leave is made by an employee or an employer becomes aware, yeah, we got to work with them and we have to find out whether or not they're eligible and whether or not their event qualifies. And if it is, and we have to designate it as such. Sorry, employees who don't want to designate it that way. It's kind of out of our hands, thanks to the Department of Labor and all the fun laws, right? So that's it. I just like to reiterate to our employees that really it's a benefit for them. It is protected leave, and we would explain protective leave as there are certain things when they're on protected leave that can't be held against them for being gone. So really, it's to their benefit to have their time designated that way in that ice cream sundae. Um, now, we are supposed to give their eligibility, their rights, and as within 5 business days if we have that information. Um, and then we have an obligation to have our employees get that medical cert out to their provider and get us that medical cert 15 days. So as you can see, the little track on that slide, there's steps, and sometimes there are steps that like take a little bit more time, especially if an employee is out or we just find out that they left and a supervisor is like, oh, hey, so and so is going to be out to have surgery and they left Friday and now they're out for like a month or whatever it might be. Um, so just know that as much as there can be barriers and stoppages in the process, we are working hard to try to get that going. We do have stop points, and those some of those time provisions are built in to the law for the benefit of the employees so that they're not lying in the hospital bed and like just worried about having to get the medical cert back to us or whatnot. We are working with the employees, their providers, if they ask us to get that going. We know it can be frustrating for you and supervisors and people on the other end, but we do try to work through that process as soon as we know to try to get people where they need to get so that they can designate their time in our timekeeping system as that FMLA event and get them their benefits. So again, we talked about ADA a little bit. One of the steps in our process is, again, it doesn't have to be a formalized request and it doesn't have to be from the employee. It can be from you, the supervisor, a coworker, a family member that contacts us, someone, from outside the agency who doesn't even work here that can let us know, that can disclose some information that they would just like us to look into a situation. Once we have that information, we have an obligation to contact that employee and ask them how we can help them. So at that point, once we're having that conversation with the employee, it's truly back on the employee plate a little bit for them to decide whether or not they want to proceed within that process, depending on what the situation is. Now, again, if it's something severe that we can see that's obviously preventing them from doing their job, that's a different scenario. But if it's something they don't wish to pursue or they're able to perform their essential functions without that accommodation and they don't want it, it's also not something that we can force upon them. Unlike that FMLA that we're making people take, right? The accommodation, again, we don't have to impose that on people, but we do want to make sure that people have the proper tools to do their job. We will work with the employee to get that medical documentation and make sure that um, we are having the information that we need to make an informed decision about whether or not this is impacting their current position and how we might be able to work with them to be able to perform those essential functions.
I have had a recent discussion with an employee who is concerned about why they should do this. And one of the thoughts we had in the conversation was obviously performance is impacted if we're looking at disciplinary action, that this is probably a good step to review. And are there accommodations we can build in and help them with so it doesn't result in disciplinary action? Because if we don't need to go there, that's always better for everybody, right? We also have had concerns from employees about people knowing or different people knowing their personal medical history and things. And what I have told employees is there are pieces of the information that supervisors or managers do need to know in order to provide the accommodation and in order to help them. So I think that's important to note that we will keep things as private and confidential as possible. Not everyone needs to see the medical note. Not everyone needs to see all of the information, but supervisors, and there are key people who do need to be involved in knowing certain details about things to help make the accommodation. And we always reiterate that retaliation is never okay. So making sure that they're feeling comfortable that they won't be retaliated against.
And Beth, now would be a good time to, you have a good way of phrasing
Oh my,
when other, no, when other employees are saying, hey, so and so is getting, I see that so and so is getting this, extra.
how come
Yeah,
I can't take a nap at work? Or how come
right.
I can't park where I want to? Or how come I can't do that? What I would, if you have any employees asking about an accommodation that somebody else has, you can't share that. You can't talk about that. You can't even say that person has an accommodation. But what you could say is, the city and the county value and respect every team member's contribution. Do you have a situation that you would like to pursue a accommodation under the ADA or other situation you would like to talk to? I would love to talk to you about that. And know that we are very confidential with employees' information, so you can feel comfortable that, and you can appreciate that we value your privacy as much as we value everyone else's.
Yes. See? Good.
Something along those lines. Like, would you like to discuss an accommodation that we may provide you? Let's go have a chat.
Yes. Uh, one of the things that Beth touched on a little bit that I like to highlight too is when it comes to essential functions of the job, modification, and you'll see this in that step 6, sort of in that middle paragraph. Modification of a job does not change the essential functions, or a modification in how the essential functions are performed. So when we're talking about giving accommodations for our jobs in the essential functions, as an employer, we do not have to eliminate or remove an essential function of a job to make it possible for someone to do that job. And we don't have to modify an essential function of that position, of those job duties.
We also
So,
don't have to hire someone else to do pieces of that job.
uh, yeah. So keep those things in mind. We don't have to change an entire job or their job duties just to accommodate someone.
You also don't have to provide the specific accommodation that someone requests. You have you sit down and have an interactive process and discuss options, and then you pick the best option. That does not always necessarily mean it's the one that is someone's top choice or the one that they really want. But we do want to be reasonable. It's being reasonable.
Yes, as step 7 says, one of the points is that we meet with the employee to discuss the specific functional limitations and how those limitations might be overcome. Um, we request input from what an employee might prefer on the type of accommodation, but note that the employer, they ultimately get to select the appropriate accommodation. So, as Beth noted, just because someone requests something doesn't mean that it has to be granted or it has to be done that certain way. It just needs to make sure that it's meeting the needs of what is necessary in order for that person to be able to perform the essential functions of their position. Um, we might need to do outside research on costs and things of that nature to determine whether or not something is feasible or within our realm of possibilities for those accommodations. Uh, Types of reasonable accommodations, this one is good, include on that step number 8, making existing facilities used by employees readily accessible. Could be job restructuring. It could be a part-time or modified work schedule. It could be modified equipment, um, training materials, things of that nature. It could be a whole gamut or variety of uh, items. Unreasonable accommodations include removing essential job functions and creating new job duties, things of that nature. Things that would also ultimately have a very, very high cost and or change the landscape of how the team has to operate or function in order to get that um, job done as a team. I know we're close to running out of time, so um, we'll run through these just very briefly. And I'm sorry, because like I said, Beth and I could talk about this stuff forever. So if you want us to, we will. Um, One of the things that I found on this slide, it kind of gives you a little bit of a list of some of the things that are almost always designated as disabilities and some that are not, that people are. Um, Again, blindness, deafness, autism, cancer, um, epilepsy, diabetes, um, multiple sclerosis, major depressive disorders, things of that nature. Those are all considered usually disabilities and things that we would want to have an interactive process about if someone's requesting an accommodation. If an accommodation is reasonable and effective, it must be provided to the employee unless doing so would cause an undue hardship or result in a direct threat of substantial harm to the employee or others, which cannot be eliminated by reasonable accommodation. And here's the thing I wanted to highlight about undue hardship. Undue hardship means significant difficulty or expense incurred by the employer in providing the accommodation, but many factors are evaluated, including the nature and net cost of the accommodation, the overall financial resources of the employer, the number of persons employed by the employer, effects on expenses of the resources, impact on operations of the employer, and impact on other employees' ability to perform their essential job functions. And it can be difficult for an employer to demonstrate a particular accommodation would impose an undue hardship. That can be true. And when an employee, for example, might be requesting that we put in elevators or put in special, not special, additional um, entrances or buttons, while we might get a quote for that and it might seem like a high price, just know that working for the city and county, we have it doesn't, it's not just your department. It takes the entire entity into consideration. And so usually those are things that mean that they start to look more affordable under that umbrella. So we would probably need to look at implementing them if necessary. Depending upon the circumstances, leave might be inappropriate and reasonable accommodation under the ADA. Again, that's something that Beth and I would help you work through. It would also depend on that employee's makes of leave, what they've got going on, and things of that nature. As we had already discussed, our leave without pay provisions usually only go up to 90 days. And then after that, we're having a little bit different conversation about whether or not that employee is going to be able to return in a reasonable amount of time, or if we need to consider some different alternatives for that employee. Um, One of the things that has been come up to question under FMLA, and I know we're over time, so if you need to go, you can. I'm gonna roll through these just because we're almost done. And I want to have this.
We're also recording, so you can come and check this out
That too.
later and finish it up.
That too. Um, Family member under ADA. Beth touched on this again a little bit earlier, but son or daughter means a biological, adopted, or foster child, stepchild, legal word, or child. Or Beth's favorite phrase, person in loco parentis. Do you want to talk about in loco parentis?
Yeah, in loco parentis is someone standing in as a parent. So a couple of situations that I've run into here so far are a sibling who is living with dad. Dad ends up in the hospital, and so that person, in an ideal world, if they had guardianship rights or some kind of document that said they were in charge or responsible while dad is in the hospital, or if he passes away, that would be in loco parentis. Or if a couple gets married and the biological children belong to the other spouse, they're living in their household, and even though they're not adopted children or their children, that would be in loco parentis because they're living in their household taking care of them.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Again, as you can see, that Department of Labor's position under that last bullet is that such a relationship may exist between grandparents and grandchildren, siblings, or even those with no legal or biological relationships. So again, as our favorite phrase is, every situation is different. So that's why, again, it takes us a little bit more time to treat everyone as an individual and the unique cases that surround their different events that come up in their lives. Caring for a family member under FMLA. This is one that we, yeah, again, as Beth already stated, request for quite frequently as well. And so sometimes we have to say, no, this doesn't quite qualify, or yes, this one does. And the parameters that are set around that are set forth to us under that Family Medical Leave Act. And one of the ones of caring for a family member includes physical or psychological care. It can or could include care where there's a serious health condition and the family member is unable to care for their own basic medical, nutritional, or safety needs, or needs help being transported to and from the doctor. Um, again, we have to treat each of those situations differently according to the medical certifications that we get in. Beth, do you have anything else you want to add to that one? 'Cause we've had this request. We have this one pretty steadily.
I think we've covered it right now. I can't think of anything to add.
Okay. Um, so some different developments that have come up within the Americans with Disabilities Act. One of the things that we'll find is that um, does a repeated leave request equal indefinite leave? So in the legal side of all of the fun things, right? The courts often analyze repeated leave requests and requests for leave extensions as requests for indefinite leave, which is not a reasonable accommodation. And what we mean by that is when um, my example would probably be more on the workers' compensation side, when we've got someone who is out due to an injury and their medical note says, hey, I think this, their doctor says, I think this employee might be able to return in, I don't
6 weeks.
yeah. So then we get to that 6-week mark, and all of a sudden, ooh, not quite ready to return. It's going to be another 4 weeks. And it just keeps getting pushed out and out and out and out and out. Um, that's not a reasonable accommodation, and we don't need to keep just pushing that, going along with that medical note and pushing that out and out and out and out. That is when you might work with Beth and I to talk about where they're at. What have we done so far? What type of leave banks do they have? Are they on any of that leave without pay? Is there any uh, end in sight that is favorable? If not, maybe we need to look at some different alternatives or a potential separation due to that medical uh, case. So, anything else you want to add with that one, Beth?
We do have some time limits on things that we're looking at. For example, if you have an employee off work for 6 months straight, that's a really long time to be dealing without a person in your department. And that's a hardship on everyone. And that's half a year that they're not actually physically at work. So we've had some where that has ended up being the separation date, unfortunately. We've had other ones where we had a note, the 6 months passed, but we had a note that they were definitely able to return a week later, which was an accommodation. So just taking those into account with each individual situation, but yet there's still some parameters. 90 days leave without pay is the max that someone is able to use, and that's 90 calendar days. So we'll work with you on navigating some of those things. That's again why we're here.
Request for a change in supervisor. Um, the EEOC has held that an employer is not required to change an employee's supervisor as a reasonable accommodation. Again, we'll work through those as they come up. Um, we'll look at those. We can ask about reassignment, but we don't have an obligation to reassign an employee just at their request as an accommodation. So if you've ever heard some of those stories or someone has, you've had an employee request that, just know that as an employer, we are not obligated to switch supervisors or anything of that nature as an accommodation. We can look into it, but not required. Is physical presence an essential function of a job? Um, well, it depends on the job, but in many cases, the physical presence is an essential function of the job, especially one that was not remote to begin with. We don't have to make it remote. So please keep that in mind. Yes, you have to, I mean, you can hold your employees regularly responsible for showing up for work. That's an essential function of the job. Even if we're making accommodations for schedules or adjustments to what time they start, they still need to come to work. Okay. So if we're starting to run into some of those where there's performance concerns, um, you'll want to reach out to Beth or I or Carrie to help work through really what's an accommodation. Is that being met? Are they adhering to the accommodations that maybe we've already talked about or worked through that we said we would provide? And then separately, how is that, like, What's going on with your job performance? Are those needs being met? Because even if we're providing an accommodation for an employee, they still have to do their job, right? Uh, so so you still need to be able to perform the essential functions and get done what we're asking you to get done, even if we've modified or changed some of that. Um, because maybe you're on a light duty situation and now instead of making 20 widgets an hour, you only have to make 10. And if you're not able to make the 10, um, that's a different conversation that we need to have regarding your performance. You're still held to performing the essential functions of your job, regardless of your accommodations. Anything to add to that one, Beth?
That's good.
Okay. More on physical presence. And then moving out of ADA, FMLA, our paid parental leave. Paid parental leave is a new benefit. If you are a member of a collective bargaining unit, a union, your union collective bargaining unit has to bargain for and adopt this benefit because it is a benefit. Um, Once that collective bargaining unit has done that, it has an effective date. So once that effective date, let's say I'm in a collective bargaining unit, we sign off on it, it goes into effect today. As of March 6th, 2024, if I give birth to or adopt or are trying to adopt or foster a kiddo, uh, I get to start using that as of March 6th. I have a year to use it within the first year of birth. I can use it all together or I can use it intermittently. It gives 6 weeks of leave to new parents. Again, let's say I'm in a collective bargaining unit and it goes into effect for me today as of March 6th. I gave birth to a baby February 15th. I do not get to go back and retroactively utilize paid parental leave. It starts on the day that my union adopted it. It went into effect. It took place. I don't get to retroactively go back and use it. Um, I know that has been caused some consternation from some of our folks. Uh, that's the way it is being in a union and collective bargaining and bargaining for a benefit. We can't retroactively go back and do that. If we, at some point, it just has to be this is the start date and it starts from here forward. One of the other questions we received about paid parental leave and utilizing that for the foster adoption process, as opposed to just the giving birth aspect, whether or not people can use that for medical appointments for the baby beforehand. Um, it is not the intent for paid parental leave to be utilized for the medical appointments following up to a birth if you're pregnant, because there are other benefits in place for you to utilize. You can utilize your sick and medical leave and FMLA and things of that nature. Folks who are trying to adopt or foster a child don't have those benefits, so they are able to utilize paid parental leave um, as a part of the process of trying to adopt or foster that kiddo. So they are able to utilize it for their appointments for foster adopt, not for medical appointments for prior to birth. For the birth, it has to happen, takes effect date of birth and then forward. Um, and for that adoption placement, uh, it takes, if they're utilizing it with appointments before, you can utilize it for that, but same, it takes place on that adoption or foster date. You have to be off of probation in order to use paid parental leave on as a county employee. Um, Probation must be a statute employee. So there you go for that, for the county folks. We do use paid parental leave in conjunction with FMLA if eligible. Again, we consider paid parental leave an ice cream, just a new ice cream flavor, and we're putting those sprinkles of FMLA on the top. We utilize a paid parental leave though before we're utilizing our other ice cream flavors. You do have to fill out an application for paid parental leave with HR and get that approved through us before you start utilizing that time in the timekeeping system. I know that seems like a pain, but this is the way that we are able to communicate with payroll who is eligible to utilize from that bank of leave and who is not. Um, so yeah, any other caveats to throw in for that one, Beth?
The only other thing I've had come up is a birth or a fostering event triggers this. So because my kids get sick doesn't mean I get to use it to go take care of my children. I've had people try to use that or put that in and try to apply for that or ask about that. So the birth or adoption, and it was just within that first year is what triggers the PPL.
Birth or
Birth, adoption, fostering.
oh, we made it. We're only 17 minutes over. So
Means it was good
again,
information.
well, as brief as we could keep it, I'm sorry for keeping you over 17 minutes and sort of rushing through a little bit at the end. But I think bottom line is there's a lot of different pieces. A lot can be at play. A lot can be intermixed. Could be separate. Could be together. But that's what we're here to help you work through and work through those processes and truly provide what I feel are some cool benefits for our employees. It's really one of the only times, in HR where I get to be like, but I'm trying to give you things, trying to give you this benefit. So I need you to come with me on the journey. Are there any questions or anything that I might be able to answer for y'all that stuck around? Thank you so much for letting me take your afternoon with my ailing voice. Um, can I answer any questions or is there anything before I let you all go?
I can chat while we're waiting. If an employee refuses, just remember that we just let them know that it's their obligation and our obligation to um, apply FMLA, for example, appropriately. If we have refusal sometimes of getting medical notes and those things, and we do have the right to designate it, we just want to make sure we're doing that reasonably and documenting that we attempted to get medical notes or that we attempted to do things. So the benefit of it is that really getting that FMLA and using that protected leave appropriately saves us in the long run from several situations with fines for not complying, or if we do end up having to get into disciplinary action with an employee, then we're accurate on their time. We were that good. You were that good.
Ah, had better days. Okay. Well, if you have any questions, feel free. You can always call or email risk@lincoln.ne.gov. That way it gets to any one of our members of our team. So hopefully we can get you a quicker response. You can reach out to Beth or I, but risk is probably the fastest way to get to us.
I was gonna say, I would prefer the requests go to the risk box. That way you don't have to worry if somebody's out for a day or on vacation or those kinds of things. That'll be the best way.
Yeah. Uh, as always, thank you, Christy. We're here to help. So if you have any questions, like I said, we're here. We'll be here. We'll be here all week. Tip your waiters. Just kidding. Okay. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.